The silent power of manipulation. She doesn't need to command, just suggest. The rest the man does on his own. Feminine manipulation isn't a shout, it's subtlety. It's the power to move the world with silence and to change a man's course with just the tone of her voice. It's the kind of influence that doesn't impose, it infiltrates. And when the man realizes it, he no longer knows if he's choosing or just reacting to what she created. The feminine has a deep emotional intelligence. She observes, feels, absorbs. She perceives what gives you strength and what weakens you. And she uses this not out of malice, but out of an instinct for emotional survival. Manipulation, for many women, doesn't stem from a desire to control, but from the need to feel safe. And safety for the feminine almost always comes from control over the environment and over the man who represents it. But there are women who take this art to another level. They've learned that power isn't in dominating directly, but in making the other person want to submit. They don't say stay. They make you not want to leave. They don't ask. They suggest. And each gesture, each word, each absence is a piece of an invisible chessboard. Manipulation begins with sweetness. She praises, shows understanding, speaks softly, smiles. You feel peace and lower your guard. But this peace has a purpose, to create a sense of trust. Because no one manipulates what they distrust. They manipulate what they believe is in good hands. The common man confuses gentleness with innocence. But the lucid man knows that the feminine carries an ancestral strength, that of guiding without needing to push. And it's precisely this energy that, when misdirected, transforms into emotional manipulation. In this video, you'll understand the 5 levels of this manipulation, from subtle validation to total dependence. Each one is a step deeper into the web of silent control, and when the man learns to see them, he stops reacting and starts deciding. Before we continue, comment below, which city are you listening to me from now? And if you've ever noticed any kind of manipulation disguised in a relationship, speak up in the comments without fear, because this channel is the space where men learn not to combat the feminine, but to understand the game that few perceive. And if you're not already a part of it, subscribe now. What you're going to hear here isn't about blaming women. It's about recovering your mental dominance. Level 1. Validation and the disguised entry. All manipulation begins with a compliment. But it's not the compliment itself that matters. It's the effect it causes. The woman who manipulates doesn't arrive confronting. She arrives reflecting what the man wants to see. She observes him, listens to his words, deciphers the tone and returns what he needs most at that moment: validation. She perceives what moves him: pride, loneliness, neediness, the need to feel important, and she touches exactly on that point. You're different. With you, I feel safe. You're the only one who understands me. These phrases seem like affection, but they're emotional passwords. The unwary man sees no danger. He believes he's being recognized, valued, admired. But what's happening is much more subtle. She's testing how much you need her, and the more the man feeds on this validation, the more dependent he becomes on her to feel whole. The woman perceives this in seconds. She sees the gleam in his eye, the posture that changes, the tone that softens. And that's where her power begins. Because the feminine, when it perceives that your emotion reacts to the stimulus, discovers the button that controls your internal state. And whoever controls your state controls your behavior. But feminine validation isn't necessarily false. She may even feel what she says. The difference is that she uses the feeling as a tool, not as a sincere expression. It's strategic sweetness, the gentleness that opens the door to your unconscious. The common man melts when he's praised. The lucid man thanks, but observes, because he knows that the woman who praises him too much at the beginning may not be enchanted with him, but with the power he seems to represent. And the curious thing is that, at this level, she doesn't yet want to control. She just wants to understand the terrain. She wants to know if you get easily lost with affection, or if you have the discipline not to need to be reminded of your own worth. Feminine manipulation doesn't begin with conflict. It begins with agreement. She says what you want to hear, gives you what your ego asks for, and when she perceives that you've lowered your guard, plants the seed of emotional dominance. That's how she enters, without haste, without noise, without resistance. Not by what she says, but by what she makes you feel. Level 2. Confusion and the game of mixed messages. The woman who manipulates doesn't want you to understand her. She wants you to think about her all the time. And that's why the second level of manipulation is emotional confusion. She gets close, creates connection, awakens interest, and suddenly disappears. She becomes cold, distant, silent. You try to understand the reason, but there is no reason. And it's precisely there that the mind begins to get stuck. The game of mixed messages is the cruelest because it's not built with words, but with calculated incoherence. Yesterday she called you special. Today she acts as if she barely remembers your name. Yesterday she seemed to need you. Today she doesn't seem to want you around. And the man, lost between contradictory signals, begins to seek answers that don't exist, but that's the plan. Feminine manipulation at this level doesn't seek clarity. It seeks emotional confusion, because the human brain gets addicted to doubt. When something doesn't resolve, the thought returns without ceasing. And the more you try to understand, the more trapped you become. She alternates between hot and cold, between praise and irony, between affection and indifference, not to push you away, but to keep you in orbit. Because the man who doesn't understand the game becomes dependent on the phase in which she smiles again, and when she returns he feels relief, an addictive relief. Have you ever caught yourself trying to decipher what she wants and feeling guilty for not being able to? That's the trap. She creates emotional chaos and makes you believe that the problem is yours, that you weren't enough, didn't understand correctly, didn't do something you should have done. But in reality, everything was under her control from the beginning. Manipulation by confusion is like fog. It doesn't hurt you, but it blinds you. You lose your sense of direction. And when you try to react, she disarms you with sweetness. You're exaggerating. I was just kidding. You're too intense. And so the victim transforms into the guilty party. The lucid man, however, perceives the pattern. He understands that the absence of logic is the very logic of the game, and that confusion isn't a mistake, it's a strategy. He walks away not because he gave up, but because he understood that silence is the only way not to feed the labyrinth. If you've made it this far, comment, which of these levels have you noticed in someone? Because the first step to escaping manipulation is to see the script she's trying to make you follow. Level 3. Guilt and invisible trap. When confusion has already fulfilled its role, she changes the game. Now the focus is no longer on leaving you in doubt. It's on making you apologize for what you didn't do. This is the third level of manipulation, emotional guilt. The woman perceives that you're someone empathetic, who cares, who reflects, and transforms that virtue into a point of control. She makes a mistake but convinces you that the problem was your reaction. She ignores you but says you're cold. She provokes you but claims you're aggressive. She distances herself and blames you for not having insisted. Everything is mirrored, distorted, reversed. And the cruelest thing is that, in the beginning, you believe it. Because guilt doesn't enter through reason. It enters through affection. She takes advantage of your sense of responsibility, makes you doubt your own memory, and plants the feeling that, somehow, you failed. Manipulation by guilt is like an emotional web. It doesn't trap you from the outside in. It traps you from the inside out. You start apologizing too much, giving in too much, explaining too much. And each time you try to resolve it, she involves you deeper. Because resolution was never the objective. The objective is control of the narrative. The woman who masters this level has learned that there is no greater power than the power of inverted emotion. She cries at the right moment, speaks sweetly when she feels you're going to react, and when she perceives that you've started to blame yourself, smiles inside. Because dominance has been consolidated. The common man thinks he's being fair, but the lucid man perceives the pattern. Guilt is the bridge between manipulation and total dominance. When you accept responsibility for something that doesn't belong to you, you surrender your emotional authority. And whoever loses emotional authority loses everything that comes after, limits, respect, and power of decision. She doesn't want to destroy you. She wants to mold you. And the first step to molding someone is to make them believe they need to be corrected. The woman who masters the game of guilt never shouts, never threatens. She disarms you with her own fragility. You hurt me. You've changed. You don't understand me anymore. And when you bow before that, she perceives that she has you in her hands. The wise man, however, doesn't react with anger or defense. He observes, because guilt, when it's legitimate, brings learning. But when it's planted, it brings imprisonment. And the man who learns to distinguish between the two frees himself from the web that traps all the others. Level 4. Control and dominance disguised as love. When guilt has already made you doubt yourself, she changes tactics. Now, dominance doesn't come through pain. It comes through calibrated affection. The 4th level of manipulation is the most subtle, because her power disguises itself as love. She dictates the emotional rhythm of the relationship without needing to ask. She decides when to approach, when to distance herself, when to reward you and when to deprive you, and everything seems natural, but nothing is. The woman at this stage has already discovered the exact point between what calms you and what makes you despair. She's learned that the most effective control isn't what is imposed, but what is felt as care. She says, "I do this out of love," but what she really does is train you emotionally. You start living within her compass. You wait for the tone of voice, the gesture of approval, the look of affection, and when it doesn't come, you miss it. You feel anxiety, and in that controlled absence, she perceives how much you depend on her reaction to feel stable. This is the perfect dominance, the one in which the prisoner believes he is free. The woman no longer needs to argue or convince. She just changes the energy, and the man adjusts on his own. She's learned to associate affection and obedience, and the man confuses control with connection. The feminine, when it wants to dominate, doesn't raise its voice. It sighs. It doesn't demand. It waits. It doesn't punish. It cools off. And the man, fearing to lose the sweetness that fed him, does what she wants, without her needing to ask. Have you ever noticed how some people control without needing to raise their voice? That's the secret. The most sophisticated control is what doesn't seem like control, and that's why so many intelligent men become vulnerable before an emotionally strategic woman. The common man calls this intense love, but the lucid man perceives love, when true, liberates. The love that traps, that measures, that calibrates emotions, is a contract disguised as affection. It's affection that charges, sweetness that conditions, presence that dominates. The woman who dominates through love isn't lying. She's just playing with the other person's neediness. She's learned that the most difficult man to control isn't the arrogant one, but the one who is affection deprived. And when she finds that man, the game ends before it even begins. The wise man perceives the pattern. He doesn't react, doesn't accuse, doesn't try to compete. He just gets out of the compass. Because whoever dictates the rhythm dictates the destiny. And the man who returns to listening to his own internal time escapes the music that the other is playing. Level 5. Dependence and mental imprisonment. No chain is stronger than the one the prisoner helps to hold. In the last level of feminine manipulation, the man no longer distinguishes love from need. He no longer fights, no longer questions. He just accepts. And the most frightening thing is that he believes he has chosen this. Emotional dependence is the most sophisticated form of control because it no longer needs effort. She's already molded your thinking, your rhythm, your way of interpreting the world. Now, it's enough to exist, and your mind does the rest. The feminine at this stage is no longer a presence, it's a system. She lives inside you, in your decisions, in your reactions, in your silence. You think of her before acting. Measure your words for fear of losing her, and convince yourself that you're just taking care of love. But true love doesn't demand so much space. The woman who reaches this point has learned absolute control, not physical nor verbal, emotional. She doesn't need to order. You anticipate her desire. She doesn't need to threaten. You fear the distancing even before it happens. And that's how mental imprisonment is born, when your fear of disappointing someone becomes greater than your fear of losing yourself. The man who falls into this level lives in a constant state of alert. He feels relief when she's well, anxiety when she changes her tone, guilt when she distances herself. And the worst, he starts to think that everything is his responsibility, that if she suffers, it's his fault, that if she cries, he failed, that if she cools off, he needs to improve. And thus control changes owners. The feminine no longer needs to do anything. The masculine itself keeps the cycle running. Emotional dependence is the final stage because it kills doubt. And when there is no doubt, there is no choice. There is only conditioning. The man becomes a reflection of her mood, a slave to her approval, an echo of her presence. And each day he loses a little of what made him a man, the axis. But not everything is defeat, because the awakening begins when he realizes what happened, when he understands that her control only exists because he abandoned his own center. The woman who manipulates needs a reactive man, but before a conscious man, she loses her charm, because her dominance no longer finds where to sustain itself. Dependence is the most silent prison in the world, but every lucid man can break its bars the moment he decides not to react. Just observe. Freedom begins when the man understands that love isn't emotional obedience, it's conscious choice, and whoever returns to choosing, returns to dominating their own mind. The man who sees the game without playing. The woman who manipulates controls through the invisible. But the man who awakens sees the invisible, and when he sees, the game ends. Manipulation was never about strength. It was about consciousness. Whoever controls emotions controls decisions. Whoever controls decisions controls destinies. But her power only exists while the man reacts, while he lives trying to please, decipher, or deserve. The lucid man stops reacting. He observes. He understands that validation was bait, that confusion was distraction, that guilt was a weapon, that control was a disguise, and that dependence was the final blow. And when he perceives this, he simply gets out of the script. The secret isn't to fight against the game, it's to stop playing. Because every emotional game dies the instant one of the parties refuses to continue dancing. The woman manipulates through predictability, but the man who has learned to be whole is unpredictable, serene, and impossible to move. He doesn't need to prove dominance, he is the dominance. When the man understands the mechanism, he doesn't feel anger, doesn't seek revenge, doesn't try to retaliate. He just retreats to his own axis where her power doesn't reach, because her mind needs reactions. And the silence of a conscious man is the mirror that dismantles all illusion. The woman can try the same game with others, but she will never forget him, because the man who understood manipulation doesn't return to the stage of blindness. And the feminine, deep down, respects that. It respects the man who isn't controlled because he makes her remember the kind of presence that the modern world almost doesn't have. The presence of someone who sees everything and still remains calm. Whoever learns to see the game ceases to be a piece, and whoever ceases to be a piece becomes consciousness in the form of a man. If this message made sense to you, subscribe and continue following the series. Here, we talk about what no one teaches you, how to see the game without getting lost in it. And remember, manipulation doesn't end when the other changes, but when you stop reacting. Because the man who dominates his own mind no longer needs to win. He just remains whole.